Technically True by Tanay Pan. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Technically True. I'm your host, Tanay Pan. In this episode, we will talk about improving your public speaking, slide design, pre-talk rituals that can save you a ton of headache on stage, and tackling live demos. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Niels Leenheer.
Hi.
So Niels has been making websites since 1994 and has been interested in open source and web standards ever since. Almost 10 years ago, he created HTML5 test in an attempt to increase the adoption of then new HTML5 standard in various browsers. Lately, he has been giving talks all around the world about the open web, browsers, new web standards, and web Bluetooth in particular. Here's something that you probably did not know about Niels. He dropped out of computer science to become a graphic designer. And then he dropped out of art school to become a web designer, combining the best of both worlds. A very warm welcome, Niels. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, it's great to be here on the podcast. I've been listening to every episode so far, and it's an amazing resource for existing speakers and also new speakers. So I'm very happy to be here. A little bit about myself. Well, as you already mentioned, I started very early on with the web. I started on the internet before there actually was a web. I worked with the first browser, the World Wide Web browser made by Tim Berners-Lee, and that's when I got hooked on the web and web standards, and I've been making websites ever since. I am involved in open source software, and lately I've been giving talks, and the thing I've been talking about mostly lately is interfacing the web with hardware. Using various standards like the Web Bluetooth standard and now Web USB and the upcoming Web Serial, which I'm really interested in.
That's really cool. All right, so keeping in line with our tradition, let's do a rapid fire round. Are you ready?
Not really, but go ahead.
All right, here we go. Which 3 words would you use to describe yourself?
Actually, I'm very shy, but I'm also very enthusiastic about things I like. Let's skip the last words, but yeah.
Perfectly fine. Okay, what's your favorite tool to prepare your slides?
I'm using almost exclusively Keynote, and lately I've been using Keynote also on my iPad and using the pencil, and I love that workflow.
That's really interesting. Slide background, light or dark?
Depends on the screen on which it is shown. Sometimes I like white backgrounds because it really fit within the venue, and sometimes I like totally black backgrounds because it just fades into the screen, especially if you have a screen without any borders. The text just looks like it's floating in the air. It doesn't really matter that much for readability, at least if you have a very big font size, which you should have. But for aesthetics, it depends. Yeah.
Cool. Your favorite speaker?
Oh, that is so difficult. There are so many great speakers. So it is almost impossible to make a choice there. But I'll just go with one of the talks that going through my mind for the last couple of years. And that's a talk by Nicholas Means. And it's about an airplane crash. It has nothing to do with the web, but it has to do with team dynamics and how they managed to, well, not everybody survived in that airplane crash, sadly, but they managed to beat the odds, and some of the people did survive. And it's a story about that and how teamwork is a very important part of that. It's like you're there when he's telling the story.
Right.
That's an amazing thing a speaker can do.
Yeah, that's an amazing ability.
Yeah.
Okay, your favorite hobby?
Probably tinkering with hardware. That is just fun. Being able to let's say create a remote controlled car and then drive it around. That's amazing. And well, my 5-year-old son also likes it very much, so that also helps.
Okay, topic that you're most passionate about?
The open web, probably. The open web and web standards. That is, in my opinion, it's very important that the web is not just one big company that decides what happens on the web. That everybody is able to not only read stuff on the web, but also create websites.
Great. Thanks, Niels. This was fun. And for just as a bit of background, Niels is an amazing speaker, and I've been following his talks for a while. So we finally met this year at the Mozilla Tech Speakers Meetup in Amsterdam. So we talked about some topics for podcast episodes, and I knew we had to do this. So Niels, how did you get started with giving talks?
Well, it kind of happened by accident. I've been going to conferences for a long time, and whenever I watched the talks, I always thought that I had something I could contribute, but I never thought I would be able to, actually stand up get on stage, and actually get something meaningful out of my work, out of my mouth. But yeah, one of the conferences I regularly visited was Phone Gap Day in Amsterdam, and one edition, some of my work was mentioned by one of the speakers, and that's when I thought, hey, maybe I can do this. But then I quickly returned back to earth and forgot about it. It was actually until the next year when the organizer of that conference, Peter Paul Koch or PPK, he asked me if I wanted to give a talk at that conference. So after much thinking and almost backing out a couple of times, I decided to do it and face my fears and see if I liked it, and if not, no harm. And it went fine, and I even liked giving talks, and I've been giving talks ever since.
Inspiring. So I would like to pick your brain about how do you go about preparing for a talk? So let's say that you write up a new proposal and it gets selected. How do you start?
Usually I already start way before that. Usually I create a talk before I send in proposals. Now that means I already have everything ready, including the slides, and that is a lot of work beforehand, even especially if you don't know your talk is ever going to be selected for a conference.
Right.
But I start with something that I am enthusiastic about, that I want to talk about, that I want to tell the audience. I figure that when I think it's interesting, other people also think it's interesting, and the talk will get selected somewhere. It doesn't really matter where. I've never actually created a talk that I haven't given yet, so it hasn't been a waste of time, that approach. But I think it's an important thing that you give a talk that you're passionate about, by making sure that you create something that you want to create, and not because you have to create. That is my approach. But yeah, okay. How do you go about preparing for a talk? What I do is I just think about the topic for maybe months, 6 months, a year. And sometimes I write down little keywords. I try to create a sort of narrative in my head, write down the things I want to talk about and what I want the audience to get out of it. Once that is clear, and even if it's just in my head, I just start with the next thing, and that is making slides.
So one of the things that you mentioned when we last chatted was that you tend to start with the slides as well. And that resonated really well with me because that's exactly what I do. So you also told me that you went to an art school. So do you have some tips on slide design?
What I usually do is I try to keep it simple. So that means no flashy GIFs or long lists of text. It's just, for me, a slide is something that supports the talk. You should be able to give the talk without the slides, basically.
Right.
So what I start out with is just a background color, and then I pick a font. Not really important at this stage, but I like that I like a little visual cue that helps the creative process. Then I basically start writing words on slides. It can be a single word on a single slide, or maybe a sentence or half a sentence. You basically create a slide for every important part in your talk, and for every point you want to make and want to come across to the audience. That makes the framework where your more advanced slide design begins. And then you can add little things. You can add diagrams or images. It's kind of like an outline that you make, but I already do it in Keynote.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, good slides can both make and break the story that one is trying to tell. You also said that you have a process that you employ before you go up on the stage, sort of like a pre-talk ritual. Would you like to share that?
So usually I don't get really nervous before a talk. Well, I did when I gave that first talk, but I've given so many talks nowadays that I don't get really nervous anymore, but I do need to take some time to get myself in the right mindset to give that talk. Usually an hour before the talk, I close down my laptop and I stop worrying about my slides and just do other stuff. Listen to some of the other talks. I talk to the other people and basically take my mind off of the presentation I have to give.
Right.
And then about 10 minutes before, I usually then set up my stuff. I just take a little moment for myself. And I do some voice exercises, which is basically warming up the vocal cords, like humming and making sure that my voice is working correctly.
Could you teach me some of those exercises? That would be really interesting to learn.
Well, usually it's just breathing, just breathing in, then holding my breath for a second, and then breathing out again. It's really calms you down a bit and relaxes you a bit. And the humming, that is basically just using your vocal cords without actually opening up your mind of your mouth.
Okay.
And just do that for a minute or three before the talk, and then I just start with the talk. Of course, the thing I always do before the talk is actually empty my pockets, take out my phone. I take off the lanyard that's usually around my neck and stuff like that. But that is basically my process before a talk. I don't do power poses or something, but if that works for you, that's fantastic. Yeah, usually when I have to give a talk, I like some time for myself, but not too much. You don't want to get, if you have too much time for yourself, you start to get nervous.
Yeah.
And just by interacting with people, talking to other speakers, to listening to other talks, that takes your mind off of what you are about to do. That really helps.
That's smart. I especially liked what you said about taking off your lanyard or emptying your pockets, because I think a lot of us don't think about things like this unless something actually goes wrong. Because I remember that I used to have a loose-fitting wristwatch, and one time I wore it to the stage. So with my hand movements, it went up and down my wrist and really distracted me a lot while I was talking. And later on, one of my fellow speakers pointed that out, that it was probably distracting for the audience as well. And that's no good. So it's great to have a ritual, like you mentioned, to minimize the chances of mishaps or distractions once you're up on the stage.
Yeah. When you mentioned the watch, I also wear a smartwatch. And one of the things that distracts me the most when I forget about it is that I get notifications on my watch, and my watch just keeps buzzing, and that sometimes that just in the middle of a sentence, and that you get distracted. Usually, especially when you don't have that much experience giving talks, you have to use all your mental ability just to focus on giving that talk and you don't have anything extra,
Mm-hmm.
then that can be really, really distracting. So yeah, just take off your watch, empty your pockets, put your phone on silence, place it somewhere not on the stage, and that helped me a lot, especially when I started out speaking.
Yeah, I don't know why I have so many of these watch stories for some reason, but another of my friends who is a speaker, so what he did was he recently got a new smartwatch, right? And when you kind of move it into a position like you're going to look at the watch, it lights up. And he was doing hand movements and his watch lit up every time he moved his hands. And that was also pretty distracting. So yeah, taking off your
Yes,
watch, definitely a good
especially
idea.
if you're in a dark room, then
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like these are some things that can distract the audience. Let's talk about the opposite thing. So while giving a presentation, what are some tips to keep your audience engaged?
You can do a lot with just your voice. Usually when I give a talk, I used to, or I try to actually emphasize words and say some things quickly and other things slowly. Take a pause now and again, just to let the audience take in what I've just said. So you can do a lot with that to keep the attention. Of course, having an interesting subject also really helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things I've been doing that really speaks to the imagination of the audience is give demos. That is really difficult thing to do, and it can go wrong very quickly. So you have to be really, really careful to do that.
Yeah.
But it can be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since you bring that up, let's talk a bit about demos now, especially since they can be a speaker's nightmare.
Oh
And
yeah.
you're a fabled demonstrator with amazing live demos in your talks. So were there instances when things didn't go the way that you wanted them to?
Oh, there are so many times that things went wrong. Yeah. So my one advice to new speakers is about giving demos is don't.
Right.
Because so many things can go wrong. It is really difficult to actually get things back on track when things go wrong. So one example is that I gave a talk about the Web Bluetooth API a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago in London. So imagine me standing on stage in front of, let's say, 200 people, and I'm setting up my stuff. I have all kinds of demos. I have a light bulb, I have a remote controlled car, and I have a flying drone. And I'm wearing a heart rate monitor, which you can read out using Bluetooth. And I'm setting everything up, and it's during a break. I try to connect to the heart rate monitor.
Right.
Because I usually start that talk with a demo. I start with my heart rate right there on the screen. And already during the break, so can people can see my heart rate going up when the talk is about to start. And usually it's about 60, 70. So that's okay. And then when the talk starts, it's about 120, 130.
Right.
So yeah, it's not that I'm really nervous, but the adrenaline that just And so I start connecting to the heart rate monitor, but it doesn't work. And that's really weird because just the day before I tried in a hotel room and everything just went fine.
Yeah.
And I tried again and again and again. Didn't work. So I tried something else. I tried the car, it didn't work. I tried the light bulb, didn't work. So by now it's about a couple of minutes before my talk is supposed to start. So I get really, really nervous about this. And then just a minute before my talk starts, I can connect to the heart rate monitor. And so my heart rate is there on the screen.
Right.
And it's about 160.
Oh.
So yeah, so that was not a good day. But I do the talk. I explain what the Web Bluetooth API is about, and then it is time for the other demos.
Yeah.
And I already know that they are going to fail.
Yeah.
And so I just try, and it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried again, and it didn't work. And I moved on to the next one, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah, what you can do is you can try and try and try again. And that is really, really boring for the audience.
Yeah.
Because they're not there to see you debug problems.
Right.
At least not during that talk. But
Yeah.
so yeah, what can you do? Just move on, make jokes about it, do Q&A, and just like that the talk was over, and the talk was fine. Of course, I would have loved to see to actually be able to demo all the gadgets I brought with me, and
Right.
that would have been so much better.
Yeah.
But after the fact, I still get compliments about that talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really unhappy about it, but it depends on how you deal with it, and can you salvage the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that after the talk, the next speaker was on stage, and all my gadgets were still on the stage. And I tried again to connect to it because I tried to figure out what the problem was.
Yeah.
And then my MacBook just crashed. First, Chrome crashed hard, and then I had a panic, black screen of death on my MacBook. And then I just rebooted it, tried it again, and it connected just immediately. So I connected to the car, and it was still on stage, and I very gently pressed forward, and the car moved. And then I just quickly disconnected because I didn't want to disrupt the other speaker. But
Right.
yeah, but yeah, what are you going to do? It's hardware, it's experimental technology. Yeah, you have to set the right expectations also.
Right.
And mention that there is a possibility that it can fail.
Yeah, it's cutting edge, and well, that's life.
Oh yeah. Well, I did learn one thing from that whole ordeal, is that I have to reboot my computer before I give a talk, and I've never had a problem since. So
I'm gonna do that from now on.
Especially when you're working with hardware, then just reboot the computer, start fresh, and then. But even more importantly, and I didn't have that back then, is prepare videos. So you can actually show off the demo without actually doing the demo live on stage. And in many cases, just doing a video or making a video and showing that is even better than messing around with the hardware or messing around with live coding and stuff like that. But if you're able to do hardware demos, and if you have to be more than 100% sure that you can pull this off. If you have any doubts at all, then you shouldn't do it. But if you're able to have full control over 90% and are certain that the other 10% won't fail, then hardware demos are just amazing.
I think that's a great tip generally, that because demos fail, so it's always a good idea to make a video of it in case it fails. You can show that to people. And I think one of the tips that I'm going to take away from this incident that you mentioned is reboot my laptop before doing the live demo.
But even small things that you think that have no impact on the demos can actually impact the demo. So last week I did a talk in Utrecht, in the Netherlands, and I had a problem during one of the demos, and it's a demo where I draw a pixel art on a small 8x8 pixel screen. And halfway during the drawing, it just went black. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was until just yesterday at home. And I figured out that the HDMI or the USB-C multi-port dongle that I used wasn't able to provide enough power to the pixel screen. So halfway through, the USB dongle just shut off the power. But because when you draw, every LED that lights up takes some more power. So always exactly at the same spot during the drawing, it just shut off. So that it reached a certain limit of power it could use, and then it just shut up. So I yesterday I went to the store. I bought 4 more USB-C dongles of all kinds of different makers, and this is not going to happen again to me. But yeah, so you learn every time you give it a demo. You learn of things you should do, you shouldn't do, and you get more and more confident that you will actually be able to pull it off.
Yeah.
But when I started, I just I once did a talk that I had to give a live coding demo and actually create television app on screen during the talk as a demo. And I just couldn't get the timing right. So I basically I recorded myself. And I fiddled a little bit with the timing just to get it within the time that I had left. Because nobody wants to see 4 minutes of compiling. It doesn't really matter to what you're showing, whether or not it takes 4 minutes or just 30 seconds. I just showed that video instead of doing the actual live coding demo. And because I was standing behind my computer with my hands near the keyboard, everybody thought I was typing. and nobody noticed. And I even deliberately made some typos in the video. And I asked afterwards some people I know that did you notice something during the demo? And nobody noticed. If nobody notices, and why would you want to do live coding if you can do it in a video?
That's true.
And in a video, nothing can go wrong. Well, that's also not true.
I've had a situation where the video did not run at all.
So another tip, if you include videos in your slides, don't use YouTube or that depends on the network connection. Just include them locally in your on your computer.
And if things go wrong, I think that's okay. People understand. And I think just like you mentioned about the case with USB-C port, that makes for an interesting follow-up blog post, for instance, like a postmortem blog post, like, hey, what went wrong and what you should take care of. I think people would be very interested to read that as well. All right. Another thing that I was curious about is, what do you do when you have to wait for a bit before the talk and you are already up on the stage? So let's say your talk starts in 10 minutes. So you did all your pre-talk preparation. You're up on the stage. And I've seen speakers approach that in a variety of different ways, be that engaging with the audience, running through their slides, just standing there quietly, or even checking their mobile phones. So how should a situation like this be tackled?
Yeah, for me, once I've set up on stage, you've practiced and you know your slides. There's no reason to go through your slides again. So for me, I can just come down from the stage and talk to the audience. I have the confidence that I can just start the talk at that time when my computer is set up. I can start the talk anytime I want.
Right.
I know the what I'm going to say by memory. The computer is there. It's running. Keynote is started. Everything is prepared. I can just do something else and take my mind off things and talk to the audience. And I think it's kind of weird to be on stage, walking around. or just looking down at your phone. That doesn't really feel inviting to the audience.
If you go down and talk to the people, that also makes you more likable as a speaker, I think. And in your opinion, what's the best way to end a talk?
I always end the talk by thanking the audience. That is of course very important, but seriously, usually a talk has a beginning and an ending. It has an introduction. It has a story, usually in 3 parts. If you've created your talk correctly, it has a natural ending.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's a look back at what you've already told.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe looking forward to what else is possible. Then you just thank the audience, and that's the talk. And perhaps there's time for Q&A, but that's not always the case. But
yeah. No, I think that's a really good idea, because I think a lot of let's say traditional marketing talks really end with a call to action, and it gets pretty standard. But what you mentioned, like looking back and also looking forward to what your audience can take back to their homes and build on what you showed them, that's a great way, because they actually then take something back and take actions on the things that you taught them.
Yeah.
All right. Before we wrap up, did we miss anything? Any piece of advice that you'd like our listeners to be mindful of?
I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to you for inviting me. I had an amazing time, and it's been great talking to you again.
Same here, Niels. Thanks for joining us today. This has been amazing. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Technically True. I'm at @Tane1337 on Twitter, and I would love to know what you'd like to listen in the next episode. Until then, peace out. You have been listening to Technically True, a podcast about public speaking, developer relations, and technology, hosted and produced by Tane Pan.